I'm Elizabeth Ames, and this is Product Rising. Before we get started, Women in Product will be hosting an event on October 13th. It's our annual conference, but this year focused exclusively on senior and executive product leaders. Tickets are currently available at womenpm.org. Don't miss out. Today's episode is part of our periodic series on the state of the job market. I recently spoke with Shraddha Sunil and Mudit Saraf about their Harvard Business Review article titled, AI Has Broken Hiring. Here's How to Fix It. It's a fascinating read with insights into the challenges both hiring organizations and individual applicants face, but also recommendations for moving forward and building better systems. Shraddha and Mudit are both veteran software engineers, having worked in large tech companies, as well as smaller organizations. They are both graduates of The Ohio State University with master's degrees in computer science. Here's our conversation. Welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you both here. I invited both of you to come and talk today because you recently wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review, which somehow found its way to me and I thought was incredibly interesting. So that article was titled AI Has Broken Hiring, and Here's How to Fix It. So can you talk to start with a little bit about how you initially became interested in recruiting systems and the use of AI?
Thanks, Elizabeth, for having us here. That article, I hope it was interesting, and we have lots to talk about AI and the whole arms race and things like that. So how we got into it? So about a year and a half ago, I was interviewing when I was looking to leave my previous company, and while interviewing, I was talking to a lot of recruiters and interviewing with a lot of companies. When talking with all of these recruiters, I noticed that they had very similar patterns in terms of the questions they asked me and what they were looking for. Maybe things like my visa status and when can I join, and a few questions into technical depth of do you know Java or JavaScript, which I felt at times a recruiter doesn't have the context knowledge of every role that they're interviewing for. So we felt like maybe there's some opportunities to explore what kind of problems recruiters are facing in terms of hiring. And this was a time when AI was coming up a lot also. So we thought we could explore what or talk to recruiters and see what issues they're facing and different kind of problems in recruiting to just see if we can get some business idea there or go further into that area. That's kind of the basis of how it came about.
Now, you actually did quite a lot in terms of preparation for the article. You had written or you had spoken with, I don't know, like 120 different recruiters or something like that. So can you kind of give a little outline of, who all you talked to, how you structured those conversations and any other research that you did or any other mechanisms that you used to gather information for what turned out to be the article?
Right. So before we built anything, we wanted to validate. We wanted to find out more about the problems that were being faced in recruiting. So we spoke to a lot of recruiters, both in our network and outside our network. And we also spoke to a lot of candidates to find out what problems they were facing on their end. So it was a combination of recruiters, candidates, hiring managers, all mostly in tech. So it's very tech focused. And it was a range of different companies. So some of them were from staffing companies where they did a lot of hiring. And others were from like Fortune 500 companies. So they handled a different type of hiring, and realized that some of the problems were consistent across all these different companies. And then there were some that were unique to specific companies based on what kind of company they were and what kind of roles they were hiring for.
So it sounds like when you went out to talk to people, it was a pretty open-ended process. Did you have a hypothesis or did you have a point of view of what you were trying to find here, or was it really just very open-ended?
It was kind of open ended. We wanted to go in with a fresh perspective, but given that I've conducted a lot of interviews as part of being in my company, and I've also given a lot of interviews, I had some knowledge around the processes and things. I was aware that candidates use AI assisted tools as well going in. But yeah, just with a fresh perspective, wanting to know from recruiters more about what kind of tools they already use, what kind of budgets they have for these things, and how their processes are going. Just trying to learn more about it.
Yeah. So, based on your conversations, let's start with what has changed for job applications with the introduction of AI, because there's the before and there's the after. And maybe it's not a hard line, but I think it's interesting to talk about what that difference is there.
Yeah, lots of things have changed. For the candidate applying, they're also seeing a lot of changes where it's hard to get your resume seen by a recruiter because for every role, there are thousands of candidates applying for that role, whether or not they're qualified. Because AI is now able to easily write out these resumes, and it's able to write it in a way where it seems perfect for that specific role. So we have these. I was talking to a friend recently who has been applying for a lot of roles, and he's having a really hard time because he's saying he's competing with all these bots that are doing a lot of applications. So that's a big thing now. And I think that candidates feel compelled to use some of these tools, even though they don't want to, because it's hard to compete with someone who is using all these tools.
Yeah, I think you've touched on an area where I've heard a lot from people, job seekers, right, who will describe this process. And I've come to describe it as sort of like a giant rejection machine. Like you send something in and you almost never hear anything back. Um, that it's the exception if you hear something back. And you certainly don't get any feedback as to why you did or didn't make it into that. So I think it kind of sets up this situation where job applicants are incredibly frustrated, right? Like, how do I get to the right person? How do I know, more about this job? How do I get someone to talk to me at least? So, talk a little bit about all of the resume writing tools out there. And I think we'll get into the implications of some of those. But it seemed like in the article that you wrote that that's like the de facto standard. Everybody's out there using AI to effectively write a review and to customize a review for a particular job. And it sounds almost like customizing it for that particular job, almost irregardless of what your actual experience or knowledge is. Is that what you guys saw out there?
Yeah, so on the other end, we're seeing that recruiters are no longer using resumes as a signal.
Yeah.
Previously, you used to have all these ETS tools where the ETS tools used to match certain keywords that are present on those resumes, and they used to try to find a good fit. And that was a lot. It was a lot of inbound hiring.
Yeah.
But that's no longer the case because recruiters don't trust inbound hiring anymore. So they prefer to reach out to candidates, and they also prefer to use referrals, and they look within their network instead of interviewing people that they don't know, just because it's become a lot harder to trust that.
Yeah. Does it mean that there are actually less jobs being posted publicly, or that people have to try and find job openings in different ways? Did you see candidates talk about that at all?
But it's not exactly the job postings are fewer or something, but there was actually a case with one of the very initial recruiters we spoke with, and he said as soon as he puts out a job posting, he gets a barrage of all these inbound applicants that just apply instantly, and he has to close it down almost immediately, and it's hard for him to really go through all of these in a efficient and proper manner.
Yeah.
That's the problem with these whole mass applicants and bots just making perfect resumes and pushing them out, making it almost impossible for a human to go through all of them and actually see them properly. And
Yeah.
what was the issue you had earlier with even the mass rejection that you're saying, where it's almost like an automated system that is kind of almost rejecting everyone as well, which is kind of broken both sides of it in terms of this initial resume gaming, I would call it.
Yeah. And so in your article, you talk about the applicant side, but then you really get into the side of the recruiters, like uh, how how do they deal with this influx of resumes and how that's breaking that signal. But it goes even further than that resume signal. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that full front end of the hiring process and how that's broken, because I think that is the primary topic of your article, right? Which is that front end of the system is broken for everybody now.
Yeah. So a lot of recruiters are now looking at things like which college did these applicants go to. So one fintech company that we worked with, they decided to only hire candidates from 4 or 5 different universities that they had already vetted. And they did so because they'd already hired some people from those universities and they really liked what they did. So they felt that that was a good signal. The danger in that is that you're not giving other candidates a chance. Maybe there is a really good candidate who didn't go to a top university.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder for them to be able to get an interview in the first place.
Yeah. And in this case, you're talking about, in particular, people coming directly out of school into jobs. I don't know if these are undergrad degrees or some of these are grad degrees as well, but that's sort of a specific category of hiring, right? Can you speak to some of the insights that you saw and talked about in your article around that? I think in your article, you said something like 60% of candidates coming out of at least undergrad are using all of these AI tools to write their resumes and even to support them in the interview process, in virtual interviews that are taking place.
That was a shocking number for us too, but I don't know, maybe not too shocking with the kind of tools that are out there. So you're right. It's so moving from resumes to these first rounds, because this was like the next proper signal once you actually manage to interview a few people face to face and the kind of issues you see there. So another one of the recruiters that we spoke to actually saw this issue where there's almost a system of proxy hiring, what they call it, where you don't have the real person in front of you who's going to actually be joining the role. That is something we almost couldn't believe, because how would that work, right? Because it's like
Crazy.
interviewing and then someone else is going to show up for the role, but it actually happens. It was more common than we thought. So
Yeah.
it was one scenario where maybe it's just a phone interview initially or things like that where I'm not seeing a person. But maybe even in the case where I've interviewed someone face to face and then maybe that coordination is not there. So someone else is showing up for one of these final rounds.
Yeah.
One of those cases.
The sort of scenario is a little bit more, it happens a lot more for remote jobs because there are a lot of jobs where you might never see the person you're hiring.
Yeah.
Person doesn't necessarily even have to be within the United States. They can be in another country.
Yeah.
But want to get that United States salary. So that's why they pretend to be here when they're actually not.
Wow.
Yeah. And the other case was what we've noticed with some more advanced and sophisticated AI tools that have come out today, which literally feed you answers during the interview. So this was something really new and I think is only possible with AI, where AI is literally listening to the questions the interviewer asks and they're able to feed you answers in real time that you can literally read through in real time and try to put on a face and give a good answer. And this is actually helping candidates get through these rounds. So there are tools like there's a tool called Parakeet AI and another one called Cluely, which had become popular on LinkedIn, where people were almost uh, boasting about how they're using these tools to kind of easily go through to the next round. And yeah, it's crazy. So what our tool also does, we built a similar AI interviewing tool, more from the company's side of things. But what we noticed with a lot of candidates applying there is also we saw a lot of them using AI assisted tools,
Yeah.
and they're getting more sophisticated. It's getting harder for us to detect, which is where the whole AI arms race comes in, that we have to find better methods to catch these people, and they have to use better methods to get ahead of the tools, which
Yeah.
I don't think anyone wins there.
Yeah.
Because
Because a lot of candidates are using these tools, even the candidates who are otherwise quite good and they used to be confident of interviewing, they feel that they can't compete with these candidates who know the perfect answers to everything. So they also tend to feel compelled to use it as well.
I I found this insight in your paper so fascinating that, you know, even candidates who might have an ethical issue and say, this is not ethical for me to do this, felt like they had no choice. Like they had to do this to just get in front of people so that they could demonstrate that they were capable. And also, I think your comment here, just even about the impact it has on people's confidence, that it becomes this kind of corrosive thing is, I don't know, disturbing, I guess is what I would say, right?
that is the word I go with. But so because, for example, for like some junior roles that you were mentioning, like for tech roles, there is this format of doing these algorithmic questions as an interview process, where there's a whole bunch of questions that are available online for people to practice and try to study for. But the questions are getting harder, and there's so many questions that now, if AI can assist me with it and give me an answer directly on the spot, I don't have to do this practice. So I'm already getting ahead of all the ethical students who are putting in the hard work and trying to uh, actually solve them and do well and show their background and things, versus someone who is getting the answer on the spot and instantly answering the hardest questions, which is why companies have to make their questions even harder since everyone is answering them, and it's just a mess. Yeah.
Now, did you find that any of the answers or, insights that you got from recruiters varied from people who were focused mostly on recruiting out of college or entry level kind of positions? It's hard to say anything's entry level these days, it seems like. Or, um, were they sort of the same even when you were talking about experienced people, or did they feel that there was more to go by with experienced people?
Yeah, typically there is more to go by with experienced people. That experienced people have things to talk about, so things that they've done, and there are some things that are a little bit harder to fake. If
Yeah.
you've been, if you've had a job for several years, you can always talk about certain things, but new grads don't have that.
Yeah.
So the cheating rate is definitely a lot higher for new grads and like entry level roles versus more experienced roles.
Yeah. Yeah. So, um, is it, at least for now, are they more interested in looking at resumes for people who are not entry level, or is it really just at that entry level where things are completely and utterly broken?
I would say it's more of a case of where even things can be a little more objective in terms of interview questions and things. Coming to resumes, I feel like it's more of a mass applicant issue. So for most senior roles and even further senior roles, you probably don't have as many people applying. And
Yeah.
probably they can go through that pool, and they can use some tools to assist them to navigate through those tools.
Yeah.
The tools are not inherently bad. Like, it's only when both sides are trying to game that system and figuring out how exactly this tool is judging me, which is something a candidate should do ideally, or to know how I'm going to be evaluated. But yeah, I believe in senior roles, at least for now, the signals are stronger, where it's harder to game those systems.
Yeah. It's interesting because one of the things that you talk about in the article is um, the implications for companies in terms of the talent that they have in house and making sure that that talent is really what they expect it to be and has that foundation that the company that can then build on or whatever. Um, and the cost of not having the right people. But if it's mostly at the entry level, like how much has AI already sort of decreased the number of entry level jobs? Um, and is that just making the problem more difficult? That there's just fewer entry level jobs and more people competing for them in some way?
Yeah, that's true as well. Because especially for engineering and tech jobs, the number of entry level roles is reduced a lot because AI can do what those entry level people were doing earlier anyway. Most of the hiring is happening from mid to higher levels. But having said that, I mean, there is still some amount of entry level hiring that happens, just that the candidates expected to do more when they're on the job than they previously did. And as for the cost of hiring a bad candidate, it really varies. But there are studies that say that between 30 to 50% of their entire yearly salary is what a company might lose
Yeah.
if they end up hiring the wrong person.
Yeah.
There's so many factors. There's so many factors that depends on. Like, for example, they need to spend 3 or 4 months hiring a new person. And then it takes about 2, 3 months for them to know that this person was not a good hire in the first place.
Yeah.
And they also have to pay severance packages. So the costs really add up quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And it always seems to me like the time elapsed becomes the biggest cost because now you're kind of back at square one where you thought you were going to be at square four and now you're still back at square one. Right. Also, that once good talent is in some place, it may stay there for a while and you may have a more difficult time getting at the good talent. So, talk a little bit about um, on the recruiter side. We talked about the interviewing stuff, but maybe you could also talk about some of the effects in these back end ATS systems and the systems that recruiters are using, how those are changing. There's still a lot of just keyword matching, which is not very sophisticated technology wise. And I don't know how much other things those systems are bringing to bear, but maybe you could talk a little bit about the impact there as well.
Basically, what companies are doing to kind of tackle such issues and how they're trying to get ahead of it in terms of tools and these systems. So one is these newer sort of tools for AI interviewing that are coming up, which are kind of giving a little broader picture than just a resume. So you're trying to go after multiple signals, which initially is just like a validation or verification of this person. Like what we heard about proxy interviewing and trying to get ahead of those is I'm just trying to get multiple signals. Maybe they're verified on LinkedIn. Maybe they have a GitHub profile where they've showcased some projects. And to get multiple signals from places to make sure that this person is who they say they are, and to get a little bit of an idea of their background, and then do like a preliminary AI interview with them also, where an AI, it's gotten to a point where it's so good that it understands the context the candidate is talking about, understands what they're saying. It probes them further into deeper questions, how they evaluated what they said. Did they do some testing on it? What kind of goals were they looking for? These sort of probing deeper questions that makes them think on their feet a little bit and gives you this overall package of what the candidate is so that companies have a better signal of whether to move them to the next round. And we can do this at scale. So these are the advantages of such tools.
Yeah.
I can give everyone a chance. I don't have to be limited by a recruiter managing to just do a few of these a day. So this is where you get that advantage. And this is how companies are adapting, at least as one step for this initial round.
So bear with me for a second, just to make sure I understand exactly what you're saying. So it sounds like these systems are starting to do a combination of both background data gathering, looking at GitHub, looking at other sources of information, um, pulling up that kind of stuff and including that in almost I'm going to say like a profile of the potential candidate. And then they can do a certain amount of outbound where the potential candidate is talking to an AI agent, essentially, who's having a conversation with them that is kind of a structured conversation where the AI agent can go and probe more deeply in a particular area and flag different things or follow up questions. I would imagine that then they score those in some ways, put that in the system and then start to recommend up to the next step. Is that correct?
Correct. Exactly right. And I would add to that saying that this can include inbound as well. Now that we can take in these applications and follow the same process of checking their online presence, checking or doing that initial interview, you're opening it up to outbound and inbound to be taken into this. And yeah, if there is a certain rubric of scoring in which you're using these parameters to provide more information to the person at the end who would judge all these applications,
Yeah.
or decide who would be a good fit for their sort of role.
And how uh how much can a company customize that rubric, right? Like, is it a standard rubric that works across that ATS system regardless of the customer? Or can I, company A, say, well, because we have these needs in this area, I want it to be higher on this and lower on that or whatever.
Yeah, so the hiring team gets all the say when it comes to choosing what kind of rubric they want, and they can edit the requirements based on the role, of course. So most companies, most of these AI companies, they come up with a structure, and the hiring team can always change that and adapt it based on what they want.
And then on a completely separate note, there has been quite a number of studies that say within these ATS systems, once they score somebody, that score may be visible to other companies if that person applies at other companies. Have you seen that at all?
Should not be the case. And that is the responsibility of these ATS tools and every tool that is provided through them.
Yeah.
Make sure that the data is safe. And this is a rigorous process, even from the company side, even from the tools that are provided, where it is the duty to make sure that this information is kept private and by the terms of what they agreed to.
Yeah. Interesting. And then in your study, you also talked about some unique things around the AI actually having preferences for different things. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, there was a study that was done by the University of Maryland about how AI evaluates itself as better than another AI.
Yeah.
It's like this arms race where if a candidate uses a specific model for to generate their resume, and the evaluator uses that same model, then they're more likely to say that this candidate is a good fit, which is not the best situation for anyone really, because yeah, there's a lot wrong with that. We can't always predict what kind of model is being used on the evaluation side. A candidate can't do that.
Well, I would like to add to that to say that I feel like there are many advantages with AI also in this same department. Of course, what she mentioned is that one, ChatGPT preferring ChatGPT answers and that sort of thing. But I feel like to some extent it is less biased than what a human can be. Because I feel a human is a single person. I think an AI takes into account multiple people's opinions and preferences when doing certain ranking and certain scores. And essentially, at least what our tool also does is, as part of these interviews, we make sure to remove any personal identifiable information. So the candidate's name is not there, their gender, none of that is used to decide or evaluate the candidate. So we're trying to remove as much potential bias as possible. I feel like AI or all data that exists inherently does have some bias. So that is something we can't eliminate. And a lot of these AI tools are trained on these things. But I still feel like it has a big advantage in reducing bias because it doesn't even receive that information when evaluating a candidate.
So I understand what you're saying about that. And there's definitely quite a lot of research that's been done in the past that even just removing names helps, right? Because there's been studies done where they just put a different name on a resume and send it out, and you get different results based on the name even. But I also know that there's been studies that also show that some data in your resume is going to um, deliver some signals. So a great example is if you went to a historically Black college, it's a marker that you're African American, right? So there's certain things like that. Um, there was also in your paper finding candidates who scored low, less because they hadn't really um, made their resume look perfect and all that. They weren't really focused on performing proficiency, but they were actually better candidates. And I thought it was interesting because in one example in specific, you said this person didn't score well because they came from a regional state school. And it flagged for me like people go to schools for different reasons, right? Some people might have gotten into a big name school, but they choose to go to the local state university because they need to be closer to family or they have financial considerations or other things that land them there. And also, there's some state schools that are actually really, really good. But they aren't necessarily as highlighted, if you will. Um, so I think it would be helpful for you guys to talk a little bit about the downsides that you saw on some of these systems, like candidates that actually turned out to be better candidates but didn't perform proficiency as well. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So one of the advantages of using AI in hiring is that you can interview a lot more candidates.
Yeah.
So recruiter can only interview a few candidates a day, but an AI can interview hundreds of candidates. We are giving more people an opportunity to give you more signals, and that helped us hire someone. That's what we spoke about in that paper. It helped us hire someone who would otherwise not have been hired, but or even interviewed because um, she was from a local state school and she didn't really use any of these tools to perfect her resume. But we just so happened to send her the interview because we were sending it out to everyone who applied for that role.
Oh, I see. So you actually went back and sent a separate thing where they could do a AI interview to see how much that surfaced candidates who didn't surface the first time.
Right.
Exactly.
And then we sat with the hiring manager afterwards, and they told us that they wouldn't have otherwise hired or even interviewed this person.
Yeah.
But they did so because they ranked very high on the in the AI interview,
Yeah.
and then they were very happy with the hire. Got feedback a few months later where they were quite happy with her as a hire.
Yeah. And talk a little bit about the types of interviews that I'm assuming that you used here, which are these structured interviews that go in depth. So talk about those a little bit more, because it sounds like using that form of interview in an AI based interview, probably in an in person interview too, yields a lot more information about the qualifications of that candidate. As you say, you get better signals about whether they're well qualified. So, can you talk about those types of structured interviews?
Sure. So instead of even saying better signal, I would like to say that they're just additional signals. There's probably no perfect interview, but the format or structure we use here is just to give a chance to candidates to talk about their experience and background. And in that process, try to get some quick questions in where it makes them think on their feet and go into a little depth of reasoning and critical thinking. For example, these interviews are only about 20 to 25 minutes long, where they ask about the background. And so going back one step is we curate these interviews with the team and with the hiring manager to get a sense of their requirements, what kind of culture, company culture this person would fit into, what kind of uh, experience they're looking for, what kind of tools a person might have worked on, if that's their preference. So you're
Yeah.
creating these questions for that specific role and the company and the team that they're going to work with. One of the companies that we did this for, each of the team members in that team took the interview themselves before
Oh,
went out. Yeah, they wanted to make sure that it's not doing a good job, it's asking the right questions, and they all were really impressed by it. They were impressed by how knowledgeable the AI was to ask them further questions into making them think on their feet, and what would you do if this situation came up, or if this was what trade-off would you use and why would you do that. These sort of things helps a candidate open up and talk about their experiences, which is what we noticed during the interviews, and get a lot of additional signals into uh, their experience, their level of seniority also, and how they would tackle certain situations, and also technical depth and knowledge that they have.
yeah. Fascinating. So I want to make sure that we have enough time to talk about sort of your recommendations. So in this article, you do write some recommendations, and these are really for hiring leaders. So maybe we would start with those, what you felt like they needed to shift. And I think it's relevant to what we've just been talking about. So can you talk about those a little bit?
Yeah, I think one thing we mentioned was identity verification. So it's as basic as just making sure that the candidate is a real person and that they are who they say they are. I think Mudit spoke about it a little bit earlier, where uh, they should look more for online presence of the candidates. So look for things like um, their LinkedIn. Make sure that it's verified in the first place, and also look for, depending on the role, it might vary based on the role. But if they're a software engineer, GitHub becomes relevant. But if they're a designer, then maybe they have their own website where they put up their designs. So things like that. And also, a lot of people have started tracking IP addresses of candidates. So just so that you know that they are in the location that they say they are in, and they're not interviewing from another country or another place. So a lot of EDSs also have this in place already. So that's just a pretty simple thing to just look into. Um, yeah. Other than that, I think a lot of companies have started moving towards in-person interviews, especially for the final round. That is an expensive option, but they're finding that it's a little bit less expensive than hiring the bad person, so a bad candidate, because that can cost them a lot more time and money. So that is another thing.
Yeah. It makes it a little challenging if you're having to fly somebody in to do an
Yeah.
interview. And it's expensive for the candidate too, because they're taking time off of a job that they ostensibly already have or other things, right? So, yeah.
Another thing was just allowing AI in the interview in the first place. So roles are changing so much. All of us use AI at work all the time. So it doesn't make sense to not allow candidates to use AI during the interview, because the real job does depend a lot on AI usage. So a lot of companies are redesigning the interview process where they are allowing AI to be used in the interview in the first place. So it might look like they might have a take-home assignment where they evaluate you based off of how quickly you do certain things and how well you do it, but they allow you to use AI. So that is something that's becoming a little bit more common as well.
I would say that last piece is really critical, where you're changing your structure to allow AI, because the AI arms race is not going anywhere, where both sides just try to better their systems to catch each other or game each other. But if you allow AI, which is what most jobs allow when you're working with them, it'll it'll help you judge the candidate, their ability to use AI as well. And you can do things more like working on case studies which your company has gone through, giving them tests where that is the sort of thing they will do on the job, where you test them on how they would think about that case study and what actions they would take, rather than objective technical stuff that AI is already very capable of.
Yeah. It's kind of this notion of like letting them use AI like in the situation that you would use in a normal course of your job. Let's see how you use it, right? Because it's going to be a part of it. And so maybe that takes a little bit of the edge off of it. Yeah. Now, um, I think earlier you also mentioned that there are some companies that are like not posting jobs, right? So, we kind of have this trade-off here, which is uh, we want to use the system so that we can deal with a large scale of resumes. And so we are open to people coming in. And some people are now saying, well, I'm not even going to post it. I'm just going to do outreach. You used an example of somebody who was like, well, we've recruited from this college and we've gotten good hires, so we're just going to recruit there. We're not going to recruit other places. That has some serious implications for how people uh, pursue positions. It has some serious implications. Also, you know, if you're getting only people out of a particular school, you may be getting only one point of view and not a diverse perspective of views on things. And that may be not so great for your company in the long run. Um, were there other things that came up that made you concerned about companies taking that perspective?
Yeah, I think it's not just colleges. So this happens at all levels, even for higher levels, where they might not look at the college as much, but they do look at which company you work for. And if it's a company that they haven't heard of, then you're less likely to get an interview from them.
Yeah.
And that has a lot of consequences, like you said, because a lot of students go to a state school because maybe they can't afford to go to an Ivy League and they're really good.
Yeah.
Or a lot of people might choose to work in a lesser known company and because maybe they like to work there a little better, but after that, they might find it harder to get another job. And that doesn't seem very fair. So it does have all of these consequences, and that is quite problematic.
And definitely when you work in a smaller environment, it's a different work experience, right? There are probably not as many resources at your disposal. You probably have to be a bit scrappier about things. You don't necessarily follow policy and procedure all the time because there may not be policy and procedure. And if you're in a big company, like I've seen a lot of people come out of big companies and go into startups and they just can't function because it's such a different environment. You have to be much scrappier. You can't wait around for somebody to suggest what you should do, et cetera. So,
Yeah, I think the skill sets are quite different in both cases, and both are important. But
yeah,
but if you only pick someone based on whether they worked at Google or not, you're not getting that diverse skill set.
yeah, absolutely. So, what would you recommend for? We've talked a little bit about the recommendations you make in the article specifically for recruiters or hiring professionals, but what would you recommend? Do you have any recommendations for people who are job seekers? Like, what should they think about? And if you were looking for a job now, how would you approach that? Right? Would you approach it differently?
Yeah, first things first, verify your LinkedIn because a lot of recruiters are looking at that and they don't even look at candidates who don't have that verification tick mark against their name. So that's really important. And then just create an online presence, like we already said, because that's becoming more important than it ever was before. Um,
And by that, you mean GitHub or a portfolio of samples or anything like that that you can.
yeah, it
Yeah.
would be good to have a name where that comes up when you Google it, essentially.
The idea being for few reasons, but just an initial one, just being a verification method. I just want to make sure that you are who you say you are, and different avenues of your presence online can validate that to anyone who's looking you up. It doesn't have to be that you're forcing yourself to do too much, but for sure trying to uh, be out there and make sure that you have the validations in place that at least you're not eliminated just for the reason that they're not sure if you're the right person.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, it's like almost like a basic check at this point.
Yeah.
And then I would say that most people get a job today based off of who they know. So expand your network. And I think if you want to get into a big company, referrals are very important. So don't just apply online. Try to get to know someone in that company and then ask them to introduce you to a recruiter or a hiring manager. That works a lot better.
it's almost like going back to the basic fundamentals or basic principles that we've always had is just talk to people, get to know people in different companies, different areas where they can help you out. Just growing your network and try to learn about different people's work and how you can approach them to see if you're interested in their work. I think that's become more important today is just being out there and growing your network because you don't know who might help you from which place or might find your relevant experience important. So it's almost getting back to that. And maybe one more I'd add is to not be so scared of AI and trying to have the need where you have to gamify or you have to try to get ahead of it. I think let it do its work, but just you continue these basic principles of expanding your network and just showcasing your skills and experience. And hopefully, this whole AI arms race will reduce that issue.
Yeah. Do you find that for entry-level people, it's better if they have a sense of where they want to work and building some expertise, front end, back end, particular tools, anything like that? Is any of that helpful?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, today I think you can build pretty much anything on your own. You don't need like to spend a lot of money to build something. It's very cheap. So you can do your own personal projects. You can put it out there. You can get customers to use it. I wouldn't call it simple, but it's simpler than it's ever been before.
Yeah.
You can do all of these things, and that will also help you showcase who you are if you're looking for a job.
Yeah.
Also, maybe one of the people who buy your tool or your product can also offer you a job. That does happen more often than not.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of different ways you can do it, but it's suddenly gotten a lot harder than it used to be. So
Yeah, to add, I would say just for candidates or you were saying in specific technologies or areas to learn, I would say just whatever interests them to go deeper because having more niche, deeper knowledge within certain sectors is going to be sought after a little more. Uh, for example, I am or used to be a full stack developer, what they call it, which is knowing certain technologies. But with AI, that is changing so rapidly that I need to be able to encompass much more of what I do. But also, if you're more specialized in your domain and going further into some deeper areas, that will make you more valuable or sought after by certain companies.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. It was a really interesting conversation with you both today. And I want to recommend that everybody try and find your article and read it. It's in the Harvard Business Review. We'll put the link in the show notes. The article title is AI Has Broken Hiring. Here's How to Fix It. I think it's a really eye-opening piece. It makes you really think about the situation that we're in and how do we, from both ends, make these systems work effectively so that people can access a wide range of potential opportunities and companies can find a wide range of talent out there. And I think the work you guys did here really points out some of the challenges, but also some of the potential paths forward. So I thought that was really great. Thank you so much for taking the time. Really, really appreciate it.
Thanks a
Thanks a
lot.
lot.
Thanks for giving us the chance to talk about it and all these interesting, thought provoking questions. I'm sure people might know a lot about what we're already speaking to, but hopefully they could learn a little something from what we mentioned.
Thank you for listening. This podcast is an original production of Women in Profit. Follow us on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Leave us a review so that others can discover us. Or share this episode with someone you know. Original music provided by Jimmy Hahn.